Hi everyone. Give it a second for everyone to join. But today we're going to talk to Alease. She is on TikTok and Instagram as Alease the Embryologist. And here she is. We're going to get her in. Welcome everyone. Today we're going to talk a lot about what an embryologist is, what they do, and we have a really special embryologist with us today. Hi, how are you?
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. It's good to see you. So we'll let people hop on, but today we really want to help educate people. That's our goal. Alease is really fantastic educator. You can follow her on TikTok and Instagram, Alease the Embryologist. She is an accomplished embryologist, educator, content creator. She has worked in IVF lab and will often post, I don't know, how many years have you worked in IVF lab?
I've been in the lab about 5.5 years.
Okay, cool. And she's often posting educational videos about what an embryologist does and can show you actually how eggs and sperm meet in a lab and the beauty of that process. And she takes it in a really respectful tone as well and brings a lot of, I would say, levity to the process, which can sometimes be really heavy. I feel like you can share that process with people in such a way which brings a little bit of lightness to it, if that makes any sense. I don't know if you're, but like watching your videos, watching your content, I feel like you have a really approachable way of talking about what can be a really emotional time for people, what can be a really confusing time, which has a lot of information overload, and just a good source of understanding what goes on in the lab and how that can support you in the process. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what is embryology, what you do, any support or advice as well that you want to share with people. And then we can also just help differentiate between IVF and home insemination, because there are some major differences there and different reasons why you might do home insemination versus why someone should be looking at IVF and when that might be something you would consider an option for yourself. So yeah, without further ado, Alease, let me give you a little background. I printed up just so I made sure I got all the details right about you, but she has her bachelor's degree in genetics from North Carolina State University. She is an established and skilled embryologist in the field of reproductive medicine, and she is a passionate educator, which we talked about, and content creator. She uses her platforms on Instagram and TikTok to help people better understand the process of embryology, what an embryologist does, and IVF overall. And you have also been intimate in your own personal journeys and have shared some of your journey as well with folks who are following along. And anybody who's watching, you're welcome to just real quick, just share where you're watching from. Love to see that. Love to see where you're coming from across the country, across the globe. Hi to everybody joining. And if you have questions, we'll try to address them. Feel free to put those in the chat as well. We'll see them kind of coming by, and we've got a colleague here keeping track of some of those, so we can try to address those as they come up or at the end of the video. And yeah, let's get started. So I first would really love to know, oh yeah, I see people coming in from Texas,
Yeah, all over
New
the
Jersey,
place.
Ohio. But I would love, and North Carolina. I knew we'd have somebody from North Carolina. Love to say hi to everybody. So great to see that. It makes it so much more personal to see where everybody is coming from. And for those of you who don't know, I'm Maureen Brown, CEO and co-founder of Mosie. Almost forgot to introduce myself. We created the first OTC syringe for home insemination, specifically designed for home insemination. We have a patented unique slit opening on our syringe, which mimics Mother Nature. And that is the way the male appendage is set up, and Mother Nature had some thoughtful design there, which we mimic, which creates a gentler passage for the semen. So here we are today, though. We're going to focus in on embryology, and Alease is going to share a little bit of insight with us. So we'll start with you. So tell us, in the most basic way, what is embryology? What do you do? And what should we know about it?
Absolutely. So embryologists are the ones, sorry if it's a little echoey, I'm in the conference room, there's nobody here, so it's a little echoey. But essentially we are the ones in the IVF lab taking care of your eggs and sperm. So we are responsible for creating the embryos, culturing them, doing the transfers, freezing them, thawing them, kind of anything that is lab related to your embryos. We are the ones that are involved. And for a long time, I didn't know what embryologists were, that we existed, but I'm glad I found the field because I think it's a great fit for me and I definitely have a passion for it. So
awesome. So I have a really basic, maybe dumb question, but I always am fascinated by this. So you get them from the moment they're secured, like the eggs. What happens? Like, so, you know, you have your surgery, the eggs are removed, they're put into a vial, I'm assuming, and then tell us about like how does it transfer into the lab? How does it go from one place to the other?
absolutely. So while the patient is in their surgery for their egg retrieval, the physician is using kind of a long needle and suction to suction fluid from your ovaries. So your ovaries have been stimulated with all this medication to produce more eggs than a typical cycle, but the follicles that hold the eggs in your ovaries are filled with follicular fluid. So they're draining that follicular fluid to get the eggs out of the follicles. That drains into a little tube, and we as embryologists get that tube in the lab. We are looking through that follicular fluid for the eggs, and then we typically take them from the follicular fluid and they're placed in like a whole dish with culture media until we're ready to use them. So during the retrieval, they're kind of in a dish separately. But yeah, we're kind of searching through that fluid to find the eggs in there.
And then do you separate them out at that point once you go through that process of you said you're looking through that fluid? Is that something where you like then individually separate them out and store them, or do you keep them all stored for future use in like one container or one tube, as you were mentioning?
Yeah, so we get the fluid in like a conical tube. And we dump that into a petri dish and we're looking for the eggs in there. Once we find an egg, we remove it from the fluid and place it into a dish with media, and all of the eggs from the retrieval are placed in that same dish. And then once the retrieval is over with, because the retrieval is only 20-30 minutes, it's a fairly short amount of time. And so once the retrieval is over, we know how many eggs we found. And then at that point, we are moving them into an incubator or stripping them depending on what the patient is doing, whether they're doing ICSI, which is intracytoplasmic sperm injection, or they're doing conventional insemination.
Okay, so those are two things that we should dive into real quick too. ICSI versus what you call traditional. So explain those for people who are just joining. We're talking about what an embryologist does. She's working in the lab. She's handling the eggs as they come in, and the sperm. Eventually, you're combining that in hopes of making an embryo. So tell us a little bit about those two that you mentioned.
Absolutely. So conventional insemination was kind of the traditional method that was used. And that's where we just take the eggs and the sperm, we're putting them in the same media. And while we're getting them much closer than, kind of natural conception, the sperm still have to make their way into the egg and all of that sort of thing. Maybe 20, 30 years ago, we started ICSI, which stands for intracytoplasmic sperm injection. That is where we are actually using a small needle, picking up one individual sperm and injecting it directly into the egg. And this was a big, big deal for the IVF world because it really helped patients who had severe male factor infertility that weren't good candidates for conventional insemination. So anyone who had vasectomies or failed vasectomy reversals, testicular failure, all those patients who have, lower than optimal sperm parameters, we were able to get good fertilization for those patients.
Awesome. I know there's been a ton of advancement, which is really exciting because IVF is investment in time and emotion and finances, and so anything that can be done there to help improve the process, I think it's just remarkable. So tell us a little bit about what you see from your perspective. Now, you're an embryologist, different perspective than maybe like a reproductive endocrinologist. Typically, that's fertility specialist. So tell us about your perspective on what you wish people knew about IVF prior to doing IVF or prior to going into a fertility clinic. Is there anything you'd like to share with people who might be considering that?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is that it doesn't guarantee you a baby. I think there's a misconception that a lot of people think, oh, we can just do IVF, we'll get pregnant that way. And there are a lot of patients who have to do multiple cycles of IVF and may still not have their baby and decide, hey, we're going to step away from this. We're drained emotionally, financially, and physically. And so, they decide to step away. So it's definitely not a guarantee. We give patients a chance at a child that they may, a higher chance at a child that they may have had trying naturally, but, it's not a guarantee, unfortunately. And I think that can be a big misconception for patients who are kind of just starting the process.
And so I want to just quickly answer a few questions I saw. So somebody asked if this will be posted later that they wanted to watch, but they couldn't watch right now. And yes, we will be sharing this later. And usually we've been sharing on YouTube as well. So it'll be posted somewhere. So yes. And then someone asked about purchasing at CVS. We are actually going in stock right now back in CVS. So select CVS stores. That'll be updated on our website soon over the next couple of weeks. But you can still purchase from our website at this time. And then, do we have any other questions that you've got? Oh, no, I just want to do a quick check-in. So people who are joining in, we are talking about IVF. Alease is an embryologist. She has really awesome Instagram and TikTok where she shares videos about what an embryologist does and some from her own personal journey. And as well, she has really awesome videos where she's got the actual egg in a petri dish and ICSI, which she was just talking about. She has a video about that on her page as well. So what would somebody need to do to, so I want to go back to being an embryologist a little bit. Mm-hmm. What does somebody need to do to become an embryologist? Like, how does someone get to that path? How does someone find themselves in the lab? And what does that look like? What does that look like as a journey for a career path?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm actually teaching today at a training facility, but it's not super clear when you Google it. I've had so many people say, well, I Googled it and it doesn't really tell me. So I'm here to give you all the juicy, insights. So in the United States, so this may be different for Canada or other countries, federally, embryologists are only required to have a certain number of science credits. So like your chemistry, biology, physics, any of those sciences, you have to have a minimum of 24 credit hours for that to be able to become an embryologist. Now, I will say most clinics, if not all, typically require embryologists to have a bachelor's degree, and that's usually in a science, a biology, a chemistry. Mine was genetics. Animal science is very popular major for embryologists. I think a lot of people start in animal science and decide to go to vet school and then, end up going the embryology route. But yeah, so once you've got that bachelor's degree, there's a couple of ways you can get into the field. So me personally, I was just really interested, and Google didn't tell me anything. So I reached out to the clinics in my area and said, hey, I'd love to learn more about this field. Can I come shadow? Can I get some more information from you? And that ended up turning into a part-time position, and that led into a full-time position when I graduated. So I started in andrology, which is all the sperm and semen testing, sometimes blood testing as well, and trained on the job to go into embryology. It took me about 4 years to be fully trained, which is a little longer than most. I wasn't really sure if I wanted to do this at first, so I kind of dilly-dallied. But, now that a couple of years have passed, there are some training facilities that are open, which I think are a fantastic option for people who can't necessarily, may want to make a career change and can't necessarily start from the bottom of the totem pole. If you've got bills and family and things, you can't start out making super low income, which oftentimes is the case when you're starting in andrology. So there are a couple training programs throughout the country that teach you all of the hands-on skills, and most of those students go on to junior embryology positions after they graduate. But yeah, the training is typically for most people 2 to 3 years, and there is no certification that's required except for in certain states. Not North Carolina, Florida, Texas, I'm struggling today. Florida, California, and New York are the 3 states that require an actual certification. None of the other states require that. Your ability to do procedures is based on your lab director. So we have a lab director who has a PhD, who is the boss of the lab, and they do competency evaluations to determine if you are competent and skilled enough to do certain procedures. So for most people, that takes 2 or 3 years to kind of get fully trained up in that.
Yeah. So basically, you know, you can't just walk into a lab and do this. You have to really fully understand what you're doing, have respect for the materials you're working for. And so this is something that you and anybody who's doing this in a lab has been vetted and is in a trustworthy position. Yeah.
And it's gone through a lot of training. I mean, I think there's a little bit of a misconception that we're training on patient cycles, and that is definitely not the case. We utilize a lot of mouse gametes and embryos to be able to do a lot of our training, and that allows us to get lots and lots of hours of training in before we even touch patient samples, which is great.
So we do have a question specifically for you. So I have a question for the embryologist. What causes the embryos to stop growing when they're growing perfectly fine, and the next day all of a sudden they stop growing and can't be used?
Yeah, so that's always, very hard for us to see as embryologists because we know it's super devastating for patients. And what's really unfortunate is as much as we know about embryos, there's also a lot that we don't know. And so we can say, oh, we think this embryo is going to do good tomorrow, and it'll be ready tomorrow. It still needs a little time to grow, and we'll come back in the next day, and that's not the case. Most commonly, it's a genetic issue with the embryo. So it's missing important DNA to continue growth. Sometimes it can be other factors, but most of the time it is a DNA issue with either egg or sperm that has kind of stopped development at some stage. And it's very common, even in natural conception, for embryos to start or to fertilize and not quite make it all the way. Because when you think about it, we're kind of shortening a year's worth of cycles into one cycle. So not all of those eggs or embryos will make it to transfer or to be genetically normal. So there is unfortunately a big attrition between like the number of eggs you have retrieved, it kind of skims down to the number of blasts that you have, and that's very common.
So are there any statistics or facts that you can share with us about like success rates or what people should understand about how many embryos end up making it, because I know that there's a process between like eggs that are surgically taken, and then you have them in the lab, and then you have the sperm, and then can you walk us through essentially what someone should expect and the likelihood that they will have a viable embryo throughout that process? Through the
Absolutely. So keep in mind, these are all just estimates. There are some people above average, some people maybe a little below average. So keep that in mind. But on average, 80% of the eggs that we inseminate will fertilize. So you can start with whatever number that you have. About 80% of those mature eggs, so we can only inseminate mature eggs, those are the only ones that will fertilize. About 80% of those will fertilize. And then from fertilization day, which is day 1, that's when we're checking for fertilization, about half of those fertilized eggs will make blastocysts. So really, we cut a big chunk off from fertilization to blastocysts. That's very common. On average, it's about 50%. So if you've got 10 eggs that fertilize, we expect 4 or 5 blasts to be usable. So either transfer, frozen, or to be biopsied. And that's fairly common. And again, that can vary a little bit depending on a lot of factors.
And then the next phase, which is actually the transfer, that is dependent on a lot of other factors as well. Your body, your hormones, your setup. So I don't know if you have any facts there on like what actually, I think it also depends on age and you know, a lot of other scenarios.
Yeah.
But are there any stats that you're able to share there, a range or anything that you have experienced in your practice?
Absolutely. So it varies. I think pregnancy rates vary the most. So I think it's really, it depends. Some of the factors that I think are most important when it comes to pregnancy rates are clinic is very important. It does make a difference where you go in terms of pregnancy rates. Age of the patient matters a lot too. And you know, the number, the type of infertility that you have. So someone who has tubal factor would likely have a higher chance of pregnancy than someone who maybe has endometriosis or something like that, or uterine fibroids, those sorts of things. In general, I think like national average is like 50%. It's about 50 to 60% chance of pregnancy from a transfer. What I always suggest patients to do is ask your clinic if they offer unified reports. I really like those because they give you your chance of a live birth, not just a pregnancy, based on your specific diagnostic tests. So they take into account your partner's semen analysis, your hormone levels, and all that sorts of things. So I really like that. The other thing patients can check out is SART, SART.org, and you can search up your specific clinic's rates. So you can look at it by age, you can look at them by PGT testing or no PGT testing. You can look at donor eggs and third-party reproduction, whether donor sperm, donor egg. And I like that side a lot because it gives you lots of information. And clinics report to SART. So we give SART our data because we have to report to FDA and CDC and all that. So those are kind of the resources I always point patients to, but in general, it's about 50%, 50 to 60% pregnancy rate.
So what was that you said, the unified report, or
Yeah.
what was that one called again?
Unified report.
Unified.
Not all clinics offer this because it is a service they have to like opt into and work with Unify. But I think a lot of times clinics will have Unify and patients don't know because they don't tell them. So I always say to ask about that one. It's Unify. And then the other one is SART, S-A-R-T. And that is a national database of clinic data. So you can search any clinic in the country. Some, I guess you don't technically have to report to SART, but I'd say 95% of clinics do. And it's a great way to see data. Usually the data is a couple years old because it takes that long to get it posted and analyzed and all that. But I think it's a great resource, especially if you are have already done some treatment or you know you need third-party reproduction or things like that. You can look in and say, hey, my clinic only does 2 egg donor cycles a year. Maybe I should find a clinic that is more familiar with this particular, you know, issue or that particular issue. You can kind of look into stuff like that.
Awesome. No, that's really helpful. So I want to round us out for people who've been watching to help clarify too about the differences between IVF and home insemination. So, Alease is an embryologist, works in a lab in an IVF clinic. She's been sharing a lot about that process and also what goes on in the lab with your eggs, with the sperm, with, you know, the embryo creation. But ultimately, you know, there are some things that we want to call out so people are aware. Home insemination is a great place for people to start who have a need for an alternative to intercourse, who have you know, obstacles to conceiving. Either they love somebody who shares the same body parts as them, or they are in a heterosexual relationship and there are a lot of intimacy challenges sometimes that arise like unexpectedly sometimes too when you're trying to conceive. Studies have been shown that people experience high levels of stress and anxiety when going through that process. And also even around 6 months in of timed intercourse, a lot of men start to have erectile issues or performance issues, sometimes just associated with that performance anxiety and the stress of performing on command. You know, we're peeing on sticks all the time. We're peeing on sticks every morning, every afternoon, wherever that, you know, that day requires. And it just becomes a really big focus. And so for us, we tend to say sometimes keep sex sexy, leave insemination to Mosie as a way to separate. But ultimately, there are a lot of reasons that drive people to our product and our website, and we're here to support you. So do reach out to us. We'd love to answer your questions. And if we don't have the answer, we're going to support you as best we can and get you to the right place for you. But ultimately, you need to be ovulating. So that is one thing that you need to know. We recommend ovulation tracking, ovulation predictor kits. There are a ton of really amazing companies out there who have tracking devices. We sell ovulation predictor kits in our store, you know, as a convenience. But please make sure you're tracking outside of an app. So apps are great. They're great for monitoring your cycle, but they are not 100% accurate when it comes to ovulation. So confirming ovulation is a big deal for using any home insemination product. And Mosie, as the first on the market, as the creator of the space, you know, we have a lot of resources on our website as well to support you. So feel free to check us out there. In addition to that, you know, when you do home insemination, you are working with a fresh sample or potentially one from a sperm bank, which you can use at home with Mosie. But you're doing it to yourself, right? You are usually at home. You're in a comfortable position, in a comfortable place, and it's at the time you're choosing in the way that is right for you. It's intimate and private. And for many, many people, this is a great step in their journey to either relieve some of that pressure they might be feeling in the bedroom or provide an option for insemination in the first place as a low cost, low intervention option first. And then for some people, it's a step for them to confirm that they've done everything they could on their own to give them the confidence or the closure that they need to go seek out care in the next direction. If you've been trying with Mosie, we recommend only trying for a maximum of 6 cycles. We want you to make sure that you are getting the help that you need. So this is not something that we recommend you doing for a year. But most people who are doing intercourse in a heterosexual relationship, 12 months is the time frame that people recommend to try to conceive prior to going on to seeking fertility specialist help. So with Mosie, we say 6 months. We don't want you to go too long in that process. We want to make sure you get directed to the next place that you might need. But oftentimes, for many people, Mosie is the step. So there's a number of different places where it could take you. But ultimately, this is something that you want to be aware of, that there is a difference between IVF and home insemination. So IVF is where you are working with a doctor. You are working with a clinic. The eggs are removed from the body. The sperm is removed from the body. We all know there's ways to do that. But most of the time, it is not done by a doctor. So the sperm is separated then from the semen. And that is where Alease's job comes in, where she's working with those life-giving materials in the lab, and she is combining them to create the embryo, which will then be transferred to your body. So this is something that you do with the guidance and support of medical professionals and a lab. And you definitely want to make sure that you're working with a medical professional before embarking on anything like IUI or IVF. So IVF, I don't know how you could do it at home. It'd be a wild story if anybody had one like that, but ultimately home insemination right now is what is known as intravaginal insemination. And that's the one that you're able to do at home. I hope that was kind of like a long-winded explanation, but I don't know if you have anything else you want to add in there.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to add was not only do we want to make sure that you're ovulating, because if you're not ovulating, then we can't do a home insemination. We want to make sure that egg is getting released. But the sperm is important as well. You know, home insemination, we want to make sure our partners or ourselves have sperm, because if we are doing home inseminations without ovulating, without, you know, good quality sperm, then, you know, we may want to consider talking to someone at that point. So I do know lots of people who will go in for diagnostic testing. They'll do an HSG and they'll do a semen analysis and then decide, hey, we want to do home inseminations. Great. We've confirmed your tubes are open and you're ovulating, and we've confirmed you got sperm. Go for it.
Awesome. Yes, thank you for adding that. And we do have a sperm test we sell, again, as a matter of convenience in our store. So I want to take just like 2 minutes. Let's answer a few of these questions that came in. So after transfer, can you go back to normal life and working out?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, so always consult with your doctor, because I'm not a physician. In general, most physicians say you are welcome to get back to normal life. Sometimes they have you avoiding like very strenuous workouts, like if you're like marathon runner or, climbing Mount Everest. We may not want to do that. But, general exercise is fine. Sometimes they'll have patients avoid bodies of water, and that's more for, bacteria reasons. Like, we have them avoiding hot tubs and like swimming in lakes and things like that, only because we've introduced something vaginally and through the uterus. We don't want any chance of infection there. But always consult with your physician and make sure anything that you have concerns about, you run past them.
Yeah. And then I just see one here, how long can the sperm stay alive before using it with home insemination? So we recommend using it within 1 hour. We actually recommend using it, as soon as you can. People sometimes have to travel with it, or they're not set up just for instant insemination. So really within the first 15 minutes is great. Maximum an hour. Sperm can survive longer than that, but that is not what we want you to be doing, because there's just less of a sample to work with for you. Let me see another question. So somebody's asking if you can talk about natural IVF. What is natural IVF? I don't know if that's...
Okay, natural IVF, which I think is a great option, kind of a middle ground for patients who may not want to go through the full stimulation process. It's a lot of hormones that we're injecting, a lot of having to inject yourself. It's not necessarily a fun process. So natural IVF is either no stimulation or very low stimulation protocols. So that's when we're not using as much, we're not as aggressive on our stimulation medications. And then there are some clinics that will allow just a natural IVF process. So we're only retrieving, one egg or 2 eggs. And this may be a good fit for some patients. One thing to keep in mind, though, is with, that attrition that happens that I talked about, we don't want patients to potentially waste money in doing a lot of natural IVF cycles. And that's why we do the stimulation, because we are essentially putting multiple cycles into one versus like one, because typically you're only ovulating 1, maybe 2 eggs naturally. And so it's a great expense to go through to just retrieve the 1 egg. But there are instances where we think it's a good fit for patients, or that's their wish. That we like to do what patients want to do. So it's either no stimulation or low stimulation protocols.
Awesome. So I'm gonna answer one more, and we have tons of questions we didn't get to. So please direct message us, or you can send us an email to Mosie at mosiebaby.com. That's MOSIE at mosiebaby.com. And Alease the Embryologist we're with today as well. Feel free to message her. So somebody had asked, I've been trying for 10 years. When do I start to get help? My heart goes out to you. That is a significant amount of time, and I want you to seek help as soon as you can. So if you've been trying for over 12 months, the recommendation is to go seek out some support. Check with your doctor first. You can check with your primary care physician. Sometimes they'll recommend you to a fertility specialist. Your OB-GYN as well is a good place to start. If you have the ability to check locally for any fertility clinics near you, many of them will take you without a referral, but it's something I don't have the answer for your specific area, for your specific fertility clinic. So my heart is just like aching for you, and I want you to go seek out some support from a fertility specialist or your medical professional as soon as you can. And then I want to say, I think I've got questions in front of me that we didn't get to, but I want to answer one more. How many days, this one? Okay, how many days after our ovulation test predictor shows positive should we inseminate? So first day that you see that positive, we want you to inseminate. And then we recommend actually within about 18 to 36 hours to do the second insemination. So if you have, so Mosie kit comes with 2 syringes, so 2 insemination attempts per kit. We actually recommend just 2, but there is the opportunity to do more if you are able to do 3 to 4 cycles, or 3 to 4 inseminations. That is also appropriate. You would just continue to space it out about 24 hours between them. But those first 2 are the most critical ones, and we want to make sure that you're timing it right. So that's great that you're using an ovulation predictor kit. And then there's
Yeah,
one
I
more
wanted to
question about
mention.
sperm and ordering from a sperm bank. I don't know if you saw that, Alease. Did you see that one?
I didn't, but could I add to
Yes,
your answer
please.
there? I was
Yes,
just going to
go
say
ahead.
that the egg is really only viable for 12 to 24 hours, but the
Yes.
sperm is viable for days in the reproductive tract. So really, like Maureen was saying, is we want to do that insemination really before you've ovulated, because we want the sperm ready and there when the egg gets there. We don't want the egg waiting for sperm. We want the sperm waiting for the egg. Because the sperm lives a little bit longer than the egg does. So
Yeah. So that first sign of ovulation, that ovulation is coming. Your cervical mucus. We have so much stuff we could talk about here. Your cervix changing, your cervical mucus. Your body is amazing. That's a whole. I love to talk about that topic, so I can't get started. But yeah, that first time that you were like, hey, I think ovulation is approaching. Get started. Alease, you are amazing. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to connect with you. Everybody, again, this is Alease the Embryologist. Go ahead, follow her. She's amazing. And message us if you have any other questions. I know there were a whole bunch that we didn't get to. So thank you
yeah,
guys
please feel
so
free to
much.
message me if you have any questions. Sometimes it takes me a while to get DMs, but I do eventually will get
Awesome.
to all of them.
Well, I know you're actually taking a break at work. So she's got to go back to work. And so she's got her own life to go back to. But she will definitely be in touch as she can. So thank you, everyone. You guys have a good rest of your day. Wishing you guys all the
Thank you
best.
so much for having me.
You bet. Thank you. Bye.